We have had some incredibly good fortune since we started this meeting some time ago with our guest facilitators. And in keeping with that, I'm very proud to introduce our facilitator for this month, DC. Please take it over.
Thanks so much, Howard. My name is DC. I'm grateful I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here with you guys today. We are on page 76 today is where we're at. If you remember last week, we went through step 6 and 7, right? I gave you guys some real, we'll call them interesting analogies around, rocks and produce and the dentist and all these things, right? All these different relatable stories to kind of give you an opportunity to see 6 and 7 through a different light. And in full disclosure, I will tell you, one thing that I forgot to mention last week was, for me, and this is just what I believe, I believe that the decision that we make in step 3 is a decision that we make, right? I think the action that's attached to step 3 actually comes in step 6 and 7. And I share this with you because even after we spent all this time talking about this last week, right? I found myself in a position having a step 3 problem, being dissatisfied. People aren't playing the roles that I want them to play, right? And all of a sudden I realized that it's me, it's always me. Whenever I'm disturbed, it's because I'm disturbable, right? And finding myself to have the opportunity and the awareness, because the more I'm in this stuff, the more awareness I get around it, right? And all of a sudden I'm remembering that I'm holding on to defects that are getting in my way, that are causing my own troubles. I've got to stay willing, right? I've got to stay in that willingness. And I think we did talk about that last week. That step 6, the willingness in step 6 for me is a daily process. And then I can be willing to go, to God and ask God to remove these defects. And I had an opportunity to do that after this meeting last week. And I love that because while sometimes those experiences are painful, they're an opportunity for growth, right? The second that I think I have this all figured out, I've got the book memorized, I've got the program down to a T, like the second I think I've got it down, I'm in trouble, right? I'm in trouble. And so anytime I have an opportunity that comes along to give me an opportunity to self-reflect, an opportunity for some humility, right? An opportunity to go to God and invite God to be a part of a solution for anything in my life is a blessing in itself. Reminds me that I'm human and gives me an opportunity to further lean into the steps. And I mentioned that humility. And so we're going into right now where we're at in the book is we're going into steps 8 and 9, right? And it starts with this. Now we need more action. I mean, we're in the chapter into action. So I guess that makes sense, right? We need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. I'm going to pause right there because I'll tell you, probably for the first 6 months that I read the book, like I heard that term, faith without works is dead, and it sounded pretty, and I just nodded like I knew what they were talking about. And the truth is that I didn't fully understand that statement. Faith without works is dead. It took me a while to really comprehend exactly what they were talking about. And I'm probably gonna bounce a little bit, not too much today, but I'm reminded at the very end of how it works, the beginning of the very last paragraph of that chapter. First, what it says to us is in this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves, right? So faith has done for us what we could not do for ourselves. Right. And that's putting down the bottle, putting down the pipe, whatever it is, it's that separation between yourself and the substance, right? No human power could have relieved that from us. Absolutely no human power. So faith has done for us what we could not do for ourselves, right? But faith without works is dead, right? And so simply, quite simply, what that is that this faith that we have, this faith that has done for us what we could not do for ourselves, must be accompanied by an outward expression, right? Through deeds and actions. And this is the part where we actually get to go out and take what we've gotten here out into the world, right? We actually get to actually start to do some house cleaning, right? Because most of the work that we've done at this point has been between us and God and our sponsor, between us and God and the pen and the paper, right? It's been a lot of writing, it's been a lot of reflecting, it's been a lot of prayer, but we haven't necessarily gone out to anybody else to like do the actual house cleaning part of this part of the work. So as we go on, it says, let's look at steps 8 and 9, right? And so step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed, comma. That's the first part of step 8, right? Because there's two parts of the step here. And became willing to make amends to them all. Every once in a while, I hear somebody say, I don't understand what the big deal is around step 8. It's just making a list. And I kind of like, I wince a little bit at that, right? I mean, quite simply, is it making a list? Sure, that's part of it. But I think that that's kind of the light lift, right? It's almost like information transference, right? I hope you kept your fourth step is what I'm going to say at this point, because there's a lot of information that came from that fourth step that we're going to be transferring over, or we're going to be using this to create this list of all persons we had harmed. But the part of step 8, the meaty part, the part that really carries the weight is this became willing to make amends to them all. Right? Not the ones that we want to, not the ones that we choose to, not the easy ones, not the, we'll get to those later ones, right? Right. This part of it requires some humility, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on that. But we've made a list of all persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And see, I'm going to keep going. We have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. You know, we talked a lot about willingness last week. You know, in step 6, it says we've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. It's a huge part of the program, right? The honesty, the open-mindedness, the willingness. It's called out in the spiritual experience in Appendix 2 in the back of the book. And here we've got another opportunity to whom we are willing to make amends. And we made it when we took that inventory. And that's what I was just talking about. We've gone through that 4th step, right? We've done a 5th step with our sponsor. We've gotten some really, really clear information about who we are and who we are not is the absolute truth. And that's kind of what came out of that. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. You know, this part of it reminds me, everybody likes to go to that, not everybody, a lot of people, like the acceptance is the answer story in the back of the book, right? On page 417. And I think that's lovely. And I think that's great. And it gives people a lot of peace and it's lovely words. But if you go a little bit further into that chapter, there's in that same story, it's on page 420. It says here, I never just sit and do nothing while waiting for him, God, to tell me what to do. Rather, I do whatever is in front of me to be done, and I leave the results up to him. However that turns out, that's God's will for me. And that was kind of the passage that popped into my head when I was kind of going through this earlier. We've subjected ourselves to this drastic self-appraisal, right? And so now we have an opportunity to take this information and to do something with it. And, you know, I'm reflecting on this drastic self-appraisal. I'm thinking about the inventory process. And, you know, I have to remember the things that are going to compile this list that comes in this list that I'm going to probably have to pray for some willingness, at least over some of these amends that end up on this list, right? I have to remember that many of these things that came from this list came from my resentments, right? Places that I felt harmed. And it's so important, at least for me, to remember that in many of those instances and many of those offenses, I set the ball in motion, right? I got the ball rolling, right? I step on their toes and they retaliate seemingly without provocation. Come on. Like I'm the one that offended people, right? I'm the one that I, triggered, upset, poked them with a stick, whatever it was. And then when they react back, all of a sudden I'm hurt and I'm sore. And I also have to remember the second part of it, right? When we're doing inventory, it tells us we're putting the wrong that others have done us out of our minds, right? We're not focused on what they've done to us. We're focused on our part of this. Where were we to them, right? How did we show up? What are the harms that we have done? And some of these are real easy to see, right? We can see where we've done financial harms, right? If we've stolen money from an employer, if we've not paid our taxes, whether or not depending on how detailed you get, it could be something like you got, too much change at the grocery store one day and you never talked to anybody about it. There's different ways of financial harm. I think that for the most part, we do see a lot of like major harms that we've done with our family and our friends and our loved ones, right? We do a lot of damage when we are out there, when we're in our cups, when we're doing the thing, and we do a lot of damage. That's kind of the nature of the disease. But the beautiful part about steps 8 and 9 is we have an opportunity to clean up the wreckage of our past. we have an opportunity to do some reparation here, right? To clean things up and to have what's hopefully going to be like a, not a complete fresh start, but a new foundation to build upon versus what we came in here with. So now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. And, I was encouraged. I had an opportunity to sit through a step series, last year. And there was this man, and he brought up a really good point. We look at the more obvious harms, the financial harms that, that where we've stolen from people, where we've been liars, cheats, thieves, things like that. And he brought up a really interesting point. He said, what about the areas that we've done spiritual harm to people? Right? What about the place around financial amends where we've been miserly? There's all these little subtle ways that we can so easily just kind of discount or brush under the rug or just roll them up into one big amend, right? We can generalize the things that we've done. I've had the opportunity to work with a couple women in this program, and it's like, okay, so I'm making amends because I was a liar. And I'm like, okay, let's dig a little bit deeper. And don't get me wrong, this is what I'll tell you. And I know I'm kind of going off on a little tangent right here. Whenever I have the opportunity to sit down with another alcoholic and to do this part of the work with them, right? We go through these things together before they actually make an approach. Because the last thing that we want is somebody going out and bringing up their version or the details that they remember, right? They're making amends for what they recall happened. And one of two things happened. Either one, that's not how it happened at all, because we were probably drunk or high and don't really remember the things, how they happened accurately. Or it brings up a whole new fresh wound for the person that we've offended, right? And so I always say that when working the steps, it's so important to stay close to our sponsors, right? And to bring God into this part of the process as well. At least that's been my experience with it. And I'm grateful for that, because some of the things, when I made my list of people I was going to make amends for, and my sponsor said, okay, what are we making amends for? There were a couple things that she's like, well, what about, did you forget? Does this resonate? Right? She asked questions. She didn't say, you didn't put this on there, but she almost threw the ball back on my court. Well, how does this feel? But here's the other part. She was like, ooh, I don't think we'd actually should talk about this particular part of it. Let's reword that. Let's walk this back a little bit. Thank God I had a sponsor, because I was about to go out there and put my rear end on display for everybody to see, right? And to possibly unearth some more harms. And the point of this process is not to have a conversation with somebody where we're bringing up the old stuff and it continues to do more harm. We're trying to set things right. So it says, we attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. There's that reminder again, right? I'm the actor who's trying to run the show. I've been moving through life before this process. I've been running through life, and I've been assigning roles. I'm assigning roles to you. I need for you guys to play the roles that I need you to play so that I will be okay. And if you do not comply, I'm going to use manipulation to get you to do what I want, right? And then things don't go off the way that I want them to either, right? I'm never happy. I'm never satisfied. And I have to remember that that is what happens. And through those actions, I end up hurting people. I step on their toes. They're sore, right? We're talking about where we were at one point in the inventory. Where were we sore? Where were we burned up? I mean, we burn up a lot of people when we're out there running a life on self-will. You know what I mean? People are like, whoa, get back. And so we have the opportunity to see, to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. And it says right here, if we haven't the will to do this, because this whole first part of this paragraph, they kind of just start talking to us like it's a shoo-in, right? You've got your list and you're willing. If there's a name on the list, then you're automatically going to be willing. And I'll tell you what, that is not necessarily the experience that I had, right? I had amends that I knew I needed to make. But I told my sponsor at that point, I said, I'm not willing. I'm not ready. Well, I said I wasn't ready, right? Because alcoholics are always looking for an easier, softer way, and not ready sounded better. It was more palatable than not willing. The fact of the matter is that I was not willing. Absolutely. I take responsibility for that 100% at this point, right? But it tells us right here, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask, right? That's a direction. In this book are clear-cut directions, right? And it tells us if we have one of these amends, if we have one of these people on our list, one of these institutions, right? Because maybe it's not necessarily a person, maybe it's an institution, whatever it is. We invite God, right? I talk to God. I bring this to God. And I said, like, for me, it's a matter of praying for willingness, praying for the willingness. Sometimes it's praying for the willingness to be willing because I've got my heels dug in that much. And there's some things that come into play at this point, right? Things that I wasn't necessarily prepared for or aware. Because I get to this point and all of a sudden I'm considering the fact that, whoa. Now I'm going to go out to these people. It's one thing to sit down with my sponsor. It's one thing to sit down with my sponsor and know that God is part of the conversation and to go through the fifth step and to see things and to have that experience, right? And then we go through 6 and 7 and we know what we want God to remove and we know the people that we want to be in and we can have an opportunity to strive towards these ideals. But now you want me to go out to the people and actually tell them what I did and tell them I'll do anything to make it right. And invite them to tell me if I've left anything out. This sounds horrifying to me. This sounds terrifying to me. This was way worse than having to do a 4-step. That was how I experienced, because now I have to go out and I have to own this stuff to the people that I've harmed. And that was absurd to me. Absolutely absurd. But I have to remember this. What happens in those moments? It's pride and it's ego, right? Getting in the way. And all of a sudden it's like, well, what if they say, and what if they didn't even know, right? I start having all these conversations. And at this point, my sponsor goes, whoa. We're on step 8. You're not going out there just yet. I need you to stay in this moment, right? She walks it back for me. She brings me back. She pulls me to take a deep breath. We're just making the list and we're praying for a willingness because we are praying for the willingness to make amends to all these people. You know, a quick story. What I'll tell you guys is that, you know, probably a year before I got sober, I got fired from a job, right? It was one of those ones where I told my mom that my position had been eliminated. It had not been eliminated, right? I had taken too many days off. I'd taken too many liberties. I had come in late, left early, whatever. You know how it goes. I'm sure many of you can relate to one of those experiences, right? Where we got laid off, our position was eliminated, whatever it was. Anyway, I got fired is the black and white. I got fired for poor performance because I was drinking and using, probably on the job. When that happened, I remember being so bitter because I didn't get a warning. I didn't get a formal warning is what I didn't get. They had conversations with me, but they didn't actually write a formal warning for me. And so I was like sitting in this place of justified anger. You know what I mean? Like they should have told me, there should have been a paper trail. I had all this other stuff. And here's the other part of it. The woman that actually terminated me was somebody who worked in human resources, who was someone I considered to be a friend of mine. But she was a vice president in human resources and I was not. And that was her job. And just because we were friends you know what I mean? It didn't absolve her from having to uphold her corporate duties working for this organization. And so this one hurt, right? I get fired from a job. I'm the one who set that ball in motion, right? I'm the one who created that, the circumstances behind that. I felt justified, and then it was a friend of mine. And so we get to this point, and I'm looking at having to go make amends to my employer. And guess what? Pride and ego jumps right in. Pride, ego, and probably a little bit of fear too, right? And I'm like, oh, nope, because I'm still in that place where I'm hung up on what they did. Because that creeps up really, really quickly, really, really easy. It comes up like we thought we were done with that when we got through this 4th step. When it told us, we're putting aside the wrongs done to us. We're focused on our part, where we were wrong, where we were to blame, what we did. But I get to this part and all of a sudden I'm scared. And my pride and ego's like, yo, remember what they did? And it was done by Christina? Can you believe that? The audacity, right? And all of a sudden I'm back in that place of justified anger. See, I get in my own way. The only obstacle in the way of me making this amends, the only obstacle in me channeling the willingness to actually execute this amends is me. It's my pride. It's my ego. It's not that I'm not ready. It's that I'm not willing. And so they give us this really beautiful direction. We ask. Real simple, right? We ask. It's an instruction to pray. It's an opportunity to invite God to be a part of the solution. You know, I have to remember, you know, if faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves, right? God's going to be able to give me some willingness. I think about the tall order that relieving my alcoholism. That was a tall order, you guys. When I came into the rooms, nobody thought I was going to get and stay sober. They'd watched me out there for 9 years. I'd had a life in sobriety. I was out for 9 years, multiple attempts to get sober. All of them failed until 2021. Faith did for me what I could not do for myself. Faith did for me what my mom could not do for me. Faith did for me what the love of my daughter was not enough to do for me. And when I think about that, faith is the result of the results. You know, and that's Donna Jay's line. I can't take any credit for that, but the first time I heard her say that, it stuck with me, and it stuck with me really, really hard, because that is the absolute truth. Faith is the result of the result. So if God can relieve my alcoholism, we hope you are now convinced that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. You know, and it tells us, and I'm going backwards a little bit, you know, on the page before, it says, if we've been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. I've heard of some people that had a whole notebook of pages of fourth step inventory, and I've heard people that just have a couple. One's not better than the other, right? Not having an entire notebook of inventory doesn't mean that it wasn't done correctly, right? Doesn't mean that you just, I don't know, maybe you were a hermit, maybe you didn't talk to him. You know what I mean? Whatever your experience was, that inventory was yours, and that's going to feed your amends, right? That's going to feed your step 8. You know, I had another, I'll tell you guys another thing. Before I got sober, I was dating a man, and at one point he came to me and he wanted new tires for his truck, and he didn't have good credit. And he came to me and he asked me if I would use my credit to finance tires for his truck. And I said yes. He promised he was going to pay me in 2 weeks. You guys, guess what? You'll never guess this. He never paid me, and we broke up, right? And then, hold on, it gets better. Then I got fired from that job. So I didn't have the money to pay off the tires. And guess whose credit took the hit? It was mine. It was mine. I was so convinced, utterly convinced that that debt was not mine. I should not have to pay it back. Absolutely not. Sure, I'm the one that signed the contract, but I don't even have the tires to show. I don't even still have the boyfriend, because he's gone too. I got nothing but a debt and a mark on my credit report, right? That's what I'm left with. But I've got this bill, I've got this debt, it's on my credit report. And somehow my pride and ego, my fear tells me that I shouldn't have to pay this, because it's not my debt. They weren't my tires. I didn't do it, right? And that's what happens is there's all that justification. And there's a part of me that's like, no, you know, maybe we'll cross paths one day, and maybe he'll give me the money, and then I'll pay it off then, right? The stories that we tell ourselves, the lies that we tell ourselves, trying to duck and dodge making this financial amends, you guys. I'm not willing. He's going to come back, or he's going to like have this change of heart and decide that he's the good guy that I always thought he was. And he's going to end up, we're going to take care of it together. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. I had to invite God to be a part of that solution. My name was the name signed on that contract. My social security number was the one that was attached to that debt. I willingly engaged in a legal financial document, a legal financial loan. It doesn't matter who it was for. It doesn't matter whether or not I had tires or a boyfriend to show for it. It doesn't, like, none of that matters. The debt was mine. And I had to be willing. I had to become willing. I had to ask God to help me be willing. And that was a hard one, because I had some heartache tied up in that one, right? I had a lot of emotion tied up in that one. And so that one took a little bit longer for me to find the willingness to do. But eventually I did. And I can tell you today that that debt has been paid. It is cleared. It is no longer on my credit. This stuff takes humility, guys. It takes this sense of, I don't even know that humility is the right word, but it does take this degree of being humble, right? We've got to be willing to be humble. We've got to be willing to square our debts, to face these things, to be willing to face and rectify our errors. And I think about this, and most of the people that I harmed, right, were the people that loved me the most when I was the sickest. See, I want justice for me, but I want to punish them. I want to be so hell-bent on the things that they did to me, the places they failed me, where they fell short, that time that they didn't, whatever, right? I start to get fixated on that again. And I completely forget that these are the people that love me unconditionally in my worst moments. I tell this story really often, and this is what I'll close with, and that's that, I grew up in a home with an alcoholic mother, and by the time I got here, I was real angry. She'll be sober 39 years on Wednesday of this week. And when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was real resentful at her because I'd grown up in an alcoholic home. And because she didn't tell me that she loved me enough, she screamed and yelled too much, and then when she got sober, I felt like she abandoned the family for AA. And so by the time, I'm doing my 4-step, of course, my mom's name is at the top of that list. And through going through the inventory process, I'm able to see some things real clearly. I'm able to see that just because I didn't do the things to my daughter that she had done to me didn't make me a better mother. As a matter of fact, the things that I had done to my child were worse than the things that my mom ever did to me. So through this process, I find forgiveness for my mom, and I find forgiveness for myself, right? And also, side note, my mom was raised by an alcoholic mother. Nobody taught her how to do it. She didn't know any better. I had a really hard time embracing that. I digress. We get to step 9. Who's at the top of my amends list? It's my mom. I'm willing to make amends to her, right? At least that's what I'll tell you. At that point, my mom had been sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for 35 years. She had loved me unconditionally through my worst moments. She knows how alcoholism works because she is one of us. And she had 0 expectations. And yet I'd go to make amends to that woman, and I'd look at my watch and I'd be like, oh, it's 7:32. I was supposed to make that amends at 7:30. Today's not the day. I'd go and try again, right? And I'd look outside and I'd be like, it's partly cloudy. I really pictured this happening on a sunny day. Today's not the day. How willing am I really? I have to ask myself in those moments, how willing am I really to make that amends if every time God gives me an opportunity, I duck and I dodge and I balk and I back away from someone who loved me? So we go back to God, invite God to be part of the solution. And I prayed on that one. I'll save the actual amends story, but I will tell you that it didn't happen anything like I'd envisioned it. It happened in a completely divinely inspired way that was more beautiful than anything I could have done. So at the end of the day, it happened the way it was supposed to. But the point of the story is that I have to ask myself, if I'm ducking and dodging, if I'm making excuses, if I'm trying to schedule an amends and I'm canceling, how willing am I really? I think we've got to be honest with ourselves about that in this part of the process. And if we are not willing, we ask God to help us be willing. I'm out of time. We only got through 1 paragraph. I don't know. I didn't know how I was going to bring it that far, but that's where we got, you guys. Thank you so much.